Or am I just allowed to? Whoa, there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, he's here. All right. All right, now that that's taken care of. Yes, sir. You got me? Wonderful. All right. So, if you've been keeping up with the reading plan, which I would highly recommend, we've finally gotten our way into the New Testament. And what's really cool about getting into the New Testament is we've been reading all these prophecies. We've been seeing all these things that point forward to Jesus. Everything in the Old Testament points forward to Jesus, points forward to Jesus. Well, we finally get in the New Testament in Matthew, and he's here. And all this lead up, all this build up, we get to start to see that, and we start to see these prophecies come true on a daily basis in our reading. And I think that's so cool that every night when I do my reading, I get to see some new prophecy come true that I read earlier in this year. And so I would really recommend, if you haven't been doing the daily reading, that you get involved in that. And you can pick up right where we're at and just make it through the rest of the year. And all the hard stuff to read is pretty much done. So you skip the worst part of the reading. You got through Leviticus, you got through Ecclesiastes, you skipped through all that. So jump in now. It's the fun stuff. So tonight, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 22. So go ahead and be flipping there. We're going to be starting in verse 15. So I'll give you a second to flip there, and we'll go ahead and pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to be in your house with your people and to dive into your word. Lord, I pray that you would take the things I say and get me out of the way, Lord, that your word would come through loud and clear, and that anything dumb I say or anything wrong I say, just get it away, Lord, and let your word come through to your people. And it come through in a way that not only they hear it, Lord, but it changes their life. Because that's the point. That's why we're here, Lord. We're here to worship you and honor you, Lord, and leave here changed. And I pray that you would do that for us tonight. I pray that your Spirit would fill up this house and that there will be no way we can leave this place the same way we came in here. In your name, amen. So tonight we're going to be looking at a story in Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 through 22, that I think we miss the point on a lot of times. I think we read through it and we don't really get the big picture. So what I want to do tonight is look at this story and see if we can figure out a way to read this in a way that changes our day-to-day life. Because that's why Jesus told the story. There's a purpose for the story. It's our job to go through and read that story and find it and allow it to change us. So we're going to get started. If my clicker will work, there we go. So we're going to go ahead and set the scene here. Our first verse is Matthew chapter 22, verse 15. It says, "Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him." Hold on. I got ahead of myself. "And they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully. And you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances.'" So we jump right into the text here and we see that the Pharisees, the Herodians, they're figuring out a way to plot against Jesus. But before we can get into all that, we need a little background information. We need to understand who the characters are in the story so that we can get a better idea of what's really going on here. So let's start with the Pharisees. The Pharisees, we know a whole lot about. Jesus battles the Pharisees for most of the gospel. And they're a group of Jews. They're the leader in the synagogues, and they hold a high level of influence politically and socially. And they're often shown as being hypocrites because what they value more than anything is their own vanity. What they value more than anything is how people see them. So they run into a lot of problems with Jesus because they care more about their religion than they do their relationship. And all they want is for people to see how great and how righteous they are. So naturally, Jesus is going to clash with them all throughout the Gospels. So we know a good bit about them. They really like to show other people how holy they could be. And obviously that's a problem. But the second group here, the Herodians. How many people know a whole lot about the Herodians? When I got to this story, I didn't. So I did some research. And the Herodians are only mentioned 3 times in the Bible, all in the Gospels. and really most of the time with this same story in the different books. But the Herodians, who are they? So the Herodians are a group of Jews that live in the same time that Jesus is, but rather than going to the side of the Pharisees and saying, the Jews are the best people, we need to be like the Pharisees, they go the complete other direction. So the Romans have taken over the Jewish people, and so the Herodians say, you know what? The easiest way for us to make it in this world is to just embrace being Roman citizens. So the easiest way for us to make it is just go along to get along. So let's just be the best Romans that we can be. We'll promote Rome, we'll promote their leadership, we'll be all about Rome. So naturally, we've got two different ways of looking at this. We've got basically the Jews over here, the Pharisees, that are all about being Jewish. And you've got the Herodians that are saying, look, if the easiest way for us to get by is to support this new emperor, then we'll just do that, whatever. It's easier. So I kind of view the Herodians as like a teacher's pet, right? They want to make sure that they're on the teacher's good side all the time, even if that means going against their own people, which is what they're doing. So you've got these two groups, and they've got two different ways of doing things. Now, the leader in this area, right, he's a tetrarch, which means he doesn't lead all of Rome. He just has this one little area. And his name is Herod Antipas. He was one of the sons of Herod the Great. Herod the Great, if you remember from the beginning of Matthew, is the leader that tries to kill Jesus as a baby. Okay, so that's that Herod. His son, Herod Antipas, is in charge at this time in this area. He took over this area when his dad died in 4 BC. So he takes over Galilee and Perea. So this is who the Herodians are supporting, Herod Antipas. Okay, so that's where they get their name, the Herodians, because they're huge supporters of Herod, even though as Jews they shouldn't be. But that's the path they chose because it's easy. So we have these two different groups, but the one thing that unites them is that they see Jesus as a problem. One group rejects the idea of Roman leadership, and the other thinks that the only way they're going to make it is by embracing Roman leadership. But to each group, Jesus is somebody that gets in their way. He doesn't help either group in their own eyes. The Pharisees see Jesus as a blaspheming rule breaker, and he mocks their perfect religion. The Herodians see Jesus as a troublemaker that poses a political threat to the country that they support. So the Pharisees, they get together and they say, well, this Jesus is a problem. He's exposing all the things that is wrong with us, and we don't like that. We don't like people calling us out on the things that we do wrong. We don't like people calling us out on our double standards. And he does that constantly. So the Pharisees, they say, Jesus has got to go. We got to figure out how we're going to get rid of him. So they get together and they come up with this plan. And they say, what we're going to do is we're going to confront Jesus. And we're going to ask him a question that no matter how he answers it, he's going to make somebody mad. And one of these groups is going to be mad enough, if it's the Romans, throw him in jail, or if it's the Pharisees, they might just try to kill him. So that's the plan. They come up with this perfect question, this thing that there's no way he can get it right. So the Pharisees and the Herodians, they're two people that believe totally different things, but because they can agree that Jesus is bad for both of them, they get together. So what is this question going to be? How are they going to come up with something that no matter what he does, he's wrong? So let's read it. Here's the question, Matthew 22, verse 17. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So we see how the plan comes together. If Jesus says, yes, it's lawful to pay the taxes, then he would upset the Pharisees and the rest of the people who don't support the Roman government and their oversight of the Jewish people. But if he says no, then the Herodians and the supporters of the Roman government, they would legally have cause to arrest him. So they think, all right, we've got this perfect question. We've got Jesus backed into a corner here. If he says, yeah, you should pay those taxes, well, all the Jews that support Jews being in charge, they're going to say, well, we can't support Jesus anymore. He supports Rome. But if he says, no, you shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar, well, now the Romans can just arrest him and throw him in jail. So, hey, we got him. There's nothing he can do to get out of this one. A lot of times when I think about the Pharisees, I think about Elmer Fudd going after Bugs Bunny. They always have this great plan, but their ineptitude shows up every time because you're going after the Son of God. He can't be got. So in the cartoons, Bugs Bunny never gets caught. It never happens. But there ain't no cartoon if you don't have the Pharisees, right? So they keep showing up. They keep trying to catch Jesus as a fraud, but he's not. And so it goes this way for them every time. So let's read verse 18. But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" So have y'all ever asked a question where you knew the question was stupid before they gave you the answer back? That ever happened to y'all? It's happened to me, right? Just in the way they looked at you or the way they began to respond to the question says, I shouldn't ask that. I messed that up. So they get that feeling here because Jesus, before he even answers, says, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites?" Like, who are you to even ask me this? And we're going to see what the big deal is about how he answers this question. But look at the way they phrased it to begin with. They come to him with flattery. They're saying, "Oh, you're a great teacher, and we know you're always going to tell the truth." And you notice who they send. Do the high-level Pharisees go? They sent their disciples. And they sent the Herodians. The high-level Pharisees didn't even go to this encounter because they wanted to make Jesus think that they're sending these young guys there so that he can teach them something, so that they can learn from them. But Jesus sees through that. He knows their plans, and more importantly, he knows their heart. So when they show up, he right off the bat, he's like, "I know why you're here. And you shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to answer your question anyway." So let's look at his answer he gives. Verses 19 through 20 and 21. Jesus first says, "Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." So Jesus doesn't really answer the question in a way that they expected. He completely tears their question apart, which is what he does every time that somebody comes to question him. Anytime you go into an encounter thinking you know more than God, you're just going to get your feelings hurt. You're just Elmer Fudd chasing Bugs Bunny again. It's not going to work out for you. So Jesus starts by saying, all right, well, who's got a denarius? Now, a denarius was a day's wage for the average worker. And that was the same amount that the poll tax was for them. So they would have to pay this poll tax to be able to vote. So Jesus says, well, somebody get out a denarius. Now, why didn't Jesus just pull out his own? Jesus probably didn't have one because he didn't need one. And we'll get more into that later. But he pulls out the coin, or they give him a coin, and he says, whose face is on this coin? Who's this coin made after? Who's its inscription? And they say, Caesar's. Well, he's basically setting them up here. And what he's saying is, if Caesar's face is on that coin and his inscription is on that coin, who does this really belong to? Well, it belongs to Caesar, right? If his face is on it, his inscription's on it, it's his. So he says, you know what? Give back to Caesar what's Caesar's. And he's not really answering a question about tax here. He's setting up a premise that will allow him to understand how bad their question was to begin with. Because a lot of people, when they quote this, they just focus on the first part, right? Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. How many people, when you read this verse, that's what you remember, not the second part? But the second part is the most important part. It's why he set up the premise in the first part. The premise is if something's made in the image of somebody, then it belongs to them, give it back. So he says, render unto God things that are God's. And when he says render here, without trying to pronounce the Greek word, it really just means to return or to give back. So it says that ownership does not begin with that person, it began with the other person, and you're just returning it. So give Caesar back his coin and give God back what belongs to God. But why does he say that? What actually belongs to God? How do we know what that is? Well, if we go along with this premise that Jesus has already set, if that coin belongs to Caesar because it's made in the image of Caesar, well, what's made in the image of God? We are, right? So if we read in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So what's the real point of what he's saying here? He's saying you are made in the image of God. So why are you worried about money when you really should be worried about giving back to God what's God's? And what's God's? You are. I am. All of us. So what does that actually mean? So Jesus is telling them, you're asking me about something that doesn't matter. Who cares about what you do with Caesar's money? It belongs to Caesar, give it back. It doesn't matter. What you really should be worried about is what you're doing with what God gave you. And what God gave you is your life. What are you doing with that? So he's saying you're born and you don't have anything, and one day you're going to die and you can't take any of it with you. So why are you worried about paying a tax? It doesn't matter. Why are you not worried about things that last for eternity instead of worrying about these trivial things? So if we keep reading in Matthew 6, we're going to be in verses 19 through 21. "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So Jesus is saying in Matthew chapter 6, earlier in this same book, earthly treasure doesn't matter. You're looking at the wrong thing. And so he's re-emphasizing that here. He's telling them all over again, you're looking at this backwards. You're worried about paying a man tax when, in the grand scheme of things, who cares? It's not an issue. There are more important things to be worried about. And we see this over and over again in the Old Testament. So if we go to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, we're going to be in verses 8 through 11. And the writer of Ecclesiastes is really going to hammer home this point that Jesus is trying to make here. It says, "I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun." So the writer of Ecclesiastes here is saying, look, I did it all. I did every great thing on this earth that you could ever even imagine doing. If you can think of something awesome to do on this earth, I did it. And what does he say at the end? It was all striving after wind. Basically, I'm chasing the wind. Are you going to catch it? No. It's not going to make you happy. It's not going to fulfill you. All these things that you put off eternity for, they're not worth it. It's a bad trade. And so we see this whole idea repeated all throughout the Old Testament, and then Jesus comes in the New Testament, and he repeats it again. You're focused on the wrong thing. You should be worried about eternity, not worried about today. We see in Psalm chapter 39 how short our life really is. Verses 4 and 5, "O Lord, make me know my end. What is the measure of my days? Let me know how fleeting I am. Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths, and my life is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath. Selah. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather." So again, it's the same idea. Your life is short. It's described multiple times in the Old Testament as a shadow. It's fleeting. It's not there for very long. So what are you doing while you're here that will matter in eternity? So we can see just by these verses that chasing wealth and going after the things of this world, it doesn't hold any purpose. It doesn't hold any value. So why do we constantly feel like we need to have more? Why are we constantly chasing the next big thing? Why are we constantly trying to get more money, to build up wealth that is just going to go away when we die anyway? And if we believe the Old Testament, this life is short anyway compared to eternity. So Jesus' answer isn't about paying taxes. It's about priorities. It's about what's really important, and the answer to what's really important isn't money. It's not paying your taxes. It's to use up every bit of this life that we're given in service to our Creator that has eternal significance. Romans 12:1 lays that out for us. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So you were designed, you were created for the purpose of worshiping your Creator. And Romans 12:1 says our act of spiritual worship is to be a living sacrifice. So if we're called to be a living sacrifice, it shouldn't be about us. It should be about service. It should be about worship of our Creator. So Jesus takes this question that they thought would expose him as a fraud, and he uses that question to hold up a mirror to them so that they can see how insignificant and how really silly their question was and how much it doesn't matter. And anytime we come across a truth of this magnitude, we really have two choices. We can either embrace that truth and let it change our life, or we can reject it and we can walk away, which is what they do. They walk away and they're crushed because they thought they had this great plan where they were going to be able to get rid of Jesus. They were going to catch him finally. Today was going to be the day. He was going to answer this question wrong and we were going to get him on out of here. But what does he do? He completely flips their question upside down and shows them how foolish their thought process was. That they thought they could catch Jesus in this when Jesus is saying, you're not even looking in the right place. You're backwards. And so when I was trying to think of an illustration to lay this out in a way that made sense, I started thinking about teaching. And this is my 11th year teaching. And for the first 9 years, I taught in high school, grades 9 through 12. And last year, I took a job as an elementary teacher. And life in elementary is different. Some of you in here know that. You go through that same struggle every day that I do. But one thing that I really wasn't prepared for when I started was how big of a deal it is when you line up to go somewhere. In high school, you don't line up, you just go. Who cares? But in elementary, being at the front of that line, that's the end of the world if you don't get it. And there are tears, there are fights, there are tantrums, meltdowns, all over where you stand in line. And it blows my mind. And I deal with this on a daily basis. And I tell them, guys, it doesn't matter. I say that about 12 times a day, just on average. It doesn't matter. You're all going to the same place. You're going to be in this line about 90 seconds, then you're all going to be in the classroom and you're going to forget that it happened. You're all going to the same place. Where you're standing doesn't matter. If you get there before somebody else, guess what? Y'all going to the same place. Don't matter. So I say that over and over and over again, and I try to help them understand that where you're standing in that line serves no purpose. You're all going to the same place. You're not there very long. So I think some of you are getting where I'm going with this. Do we not do the exact same thing when we chase after the things of this world? Are we all not trying to get to the front of that line where we're all going to the same place? We're all born with nothing. We're all going to die with nothing. Does it matter where we're at in line when that happens? It doesn't. It doesn't matter. We're all going to the same place. We all have a date that we're going to die. And we're not taking anything with us. So all these vast amounts of wealth that people build up, it's not going with you. So if you're fighting every day to get to the front of this line that we're in our day-to-day life, what are you really fighting for? What are you really striving after? In Ecclesiastes, I say, it's striving after wind. You're chasing the wind. So if that's what we're doing, we're trying to get to the front of this line while we're in this world, that line don't matter. So it's a silly example, but we do it too. Just like those second graders that drive me crazy some days, fighting each other to get to the front of that line, that it doesn't matter. You're all going the same place. But we do it too. Because we each have a time where we won't be in here anymore. And during the time that we have, are we doing things that will matter eternally? Or are we just doing stuff that matters while we're here? Because we're not here very long. We established that back in Psalms. And the stuff that we do right now, it's going to go away. Unless we are doing things that have eternal significance. Now, if we're not fighting for the first spot in line, are we okay with being at the back of the line? Well, what does the back of the line mean? The back of the line is a tough place to be. This life ain't easy in the back of the line. But what does Jesus say? The first will be last, and the last will be first. We live in an upside-down kingdom. So being last here, is it harder? You bet. But we're only here for a little while. We're only in this line till we all get back to class, right? It's a short trip. We've established that. So if things are harder at the back of the line, why do we do it? 2 Corinthians 4, verse 16 through 17. So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. That's why we stand at the back of the line. Because that's where we're supposed to be. There is a greater purpose that we are serving than trying to get to the front of the line while we're here. There's more for us to do. So now that we've established what Jesus is really saying to these people, what his true message is, what we need to figure out is who we are. Are we one of the Pharisees? Are we completely reliant on ourselves and putting ourselves at the front of that line so that everybody can see we're at the front of the line, so that everybody sees how awesome we are and the work that we do to get there? Are we one of the Pharisees? Do we not have time for Jesus because all we care about is our religion and the things that we want to do? Are we unwilling to pay those taxes that we talked about because we had plans for them already? We had other stuff that we want to do. We want to have fun while we're here. It's all about us. That's that Pharisee mentality. So tonight, are you a Pharisee? Or you might be one of the Herodians. You might just say, you know what? It's a lot easier to get by in this world if I do what everybody else does. If I go with the flow. If I'm a Jew that acts like I'm a Roman because the Romans are in charge. So am I somebody that acts like the world because right now, that's who's in charge. And that makes my life easier. So maybe I don't have to be at the front of the line, but I sure ain't going to be at the back. I'm going to be somewhere in the middle. Where it's not too hard, but I'm not going to deal with the struggles of being in the back either. So you might be here tonight, you might be a Herodian. There's another group. What if you recognize that Jesus is your Savior? What if you're not a Herodian? What if you're not a Pharisee? What if you recognize that Jesus is exactly who he says he is? But what if you're not following through? You know he is who he says he is, but you're also not willing to deal with the struggles of this world like we're talking about in 2 Corinthians 4. Are you so involved in this world that you don't have time for what Jesus has for you? And I want you to think about that for a second. Because it's very easy to go on social media and see that inflation's up. this president's ruining the world. No, that one is. Both of them are. Everybody's bad. Everybody's good. And we get so caught up in the things of this world that we forget about the kingdom that we're called to serve. God's not telling us to make America awesome. That's not what He's saying. He's saying you serve a different kingdom. You are called to a higher standard. Now, am I saying you shouldn't care about anything in the world? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a priority. And Jesus sets that priority in the way He answers the question. It's not about paying taxes. It's about giving to God what's God's. And what's God's, you are. So if you're not giving everything you have to God, then you're not following through. That could be time. It could be money. It could be anything. Because everything you have is given to you by God for the purpose of serving Him. So if we're not doing that, then we're missing the point. Then this story is going right over our head and we think it's about paying taxes. It's not. But out of an abundance of love and grace and mercy, what God gives us is an opportunity to embrace an eternity with Him, where we can spend it worshiping a God that loved us enough to sacrifice His own Son for us when we didn't deserve it. You think about everything that God's done for you. And in return, He offers you an opportunity to spend eternity saying thank you and worshiping Him for being who He is. And we turn that down for the things of the world. When the writer of Ecclesiastes says, hey, I've been there, I've done it all. Any awesome thing you can do, I've already done it. It won't satisfy you. So we're laid before us two choices. We can chase after the things of the world and become unsatisfied. And then at the end, we're just burnt out and we have nothing to show for it. Or we can spend our lives, the time that God gives us, doing things that will matter in eternity and have a life that had a purpose. A life that had meaning and had value. And it's not just thrown away. So in closing, take the time to think about who you are tonight. Are you a Pharisee? Are you a Herodian? Or are you a follower of Jesus that just hadn't put it all together of what you should be doing? The good news is, if you're here tonight, you still have time to fix that. If you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you can fix that. If you have a relationship with Jesus and you know you're not doing the things that you're supposed to, you can fix that. Tonight is an opportunity that you may never get again. The altar is going to be open for whoever you are tonight and whoever you want to be. You can change that tonight. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day and thank you for this opportunity to be in your house with your people. Lord, I pray that the words that came through tonight, that they would sit on people heavy and that they would change their hearts and their minds, and Lord, that you would just work in them. Lord, I know nothing I say will change anybody and nothing I do will change anybody. It's only through you and your power and your Spirit that people change. So I pray that you would move in this room tonight, Lord, and show people who they need to be and allow them to be changed in a way that will honor and glorify you, Lord. I pray for people that don't have the courage, that you would give them that courage, Lord, to allow them to step out of the life that they've been living and be drawn to you and live in a way that honors and glorifies you, Lord, and matters eternally. In Jesus' name, amen.